The Rise and Shine podcast series is made possible by the generous support of Bonnie Vozar of Chicago, Illinois.
You know, the great Elie Wiesel once wrote that the opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. And the opposite of life is not death, it's indifference. The end of love, they say, is usually a very quiet indifference.
This is Rise and Shine, a podcast that offers timeless wisdom and uplifting meditations to fill your heart, feed your soul, and start your day on a positive note. Here is Adrienne Gold Davis.
I think Valentine's Day is cruel. You know, the stores are so filled with those heart-shaped boxes of chocolate and overpriced roses, and there's marathon love songs and ballads are overwhelming the radio airwaves, and expectations are in such high gear, you know, for engagements and declarations of love, and God forbid you are single and on your own. Then it's a day you wish you could just sleep through. But like all things manufactured, Valentine's Day manipulates our emotions in an attempt to boost sales. It's a marketing marvel, and it has absolutely nothing to do with love, like nothing at all. And even though its proper name is Saint Valentine's Day, clearly not a Jewish concept, it has leached its way into our communities and into our psyches and into our shopping patterns. And it's not surprising, because Jewish life places a very high value on love. So, as Socrates once wrote, the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. So, let's talk about love. What is love? And how do you make love? Because if love is a verb, then it can be made. You know, the great Elie Wiesel once wrote that the opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. And the opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. And the opposite of life is not death, it's indifference. Well, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. Ah, the poison of indifference. Marriage counselors tell us that the true end of a marriage is not so loud and angry and screaming and vengeful. Often, couples split up and remain just as engaged with one another as when they cared for each other. They just replace the love with the hate. You see, the intensity of the emotion is equally passionate. It's just inverted. The end of love, they say, is usually a very quiet indifference. More I could not care less than I am so enraged. In an essay on relationships, Rabbi Landau once wrote this brilliant and pithy take on the Elie Wiesel quote. He said this: "Lovers don't usually go from love to hate, but they do very often go from love to boredom, from love to silence, from love to neglect and to lack of attention. One of the most profound secrets for maintaining love was encapsulated by the famous words from Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman. He said, 'Attention must be paid.'" Now, my late grandmother, may she rest in peace, she had a line that she used repeatedly with her grandchildren when they got married. In her British accent, she would repeatedly remind us that we should make a fuss of him or her. Make a fuss, a quaint and old-fashioned phrase which still is applicable to anything we truly care about and want to sustain. So, how do you make a fuss of someone? Well, the answer to this is as individual as the person that you care for. You know, I remember the first time I went on a momentum trip and my husband stayed home to watch our then young kids. I made it really clear the kind of lunches that my kids would eat. It would have an apple, a salami sandwich on bread, and a bag of chips. And every day, for many years, that was the only thing my kids would finish. Well, when I got home from my trip, my husband told me that lunch came back every single day uneaten. And it perplexed him. He followed my instructions to the T, he said. In fact, it got so bad that he said he left the same apple in the lunch bag for the whole 10 days I was gone. He left the chips and he ate the sandwich himself at the end of the night. He'd make a new one every morning, clearly for himself. So when the kids got home that day, I opened the lunch bag and I found the apple and the sandwich in the bag of chips, and of course it was still untouched. But I instantly understood why. You see, the apple was red, and these kids only ate green apples. And the sandwich, it had mustard instead of ketchup, and it was on whole wheat bread instead of white bread, and the chips were barbecue instead of plain. And there you have it. Making a fuss of someone is knowing the particulars of their idiosyncrasies and catering to them, not judging them, attending to them. And this is not indulgence or overfunctioning. It is a chesed, a kindness. It is an acknowledgement of them in their love language, even if you don't speak it, especially if you don't speak it. Love is sustained and fusses are made with a clear attention to detail. To love someone is to know them, to understand them. Lori Palatnik, who is, of course, the founding director of Momentum, always says that better than loving someone is understanding them, knowing them. Because if you tell someone you love them, but they feel like you don't know them or understand them, that you don't see them, then they will not internalize that love. They may even come to think that if you really knew me, then perhaps you would not love me. When we know our beloved, we can love them in a way that makes them feel loved. You know, the Torah writes, and our sages teach us, "And you shall love the Lord your God." The rabbi and writer, Shaya Taub, asked the following: how can God command love? We get there by the giving of actions, deed, and performance. And you shall love actually means you shall perform acts of love. The French writer Anaïs Nin wrote that love never dies a natural death. It dies because we don't know how to replenish its source. It dies of blindness and errors and betrayals. It dies of illness and wounds. It dies of weariness, of witherings, of tarnishings. So, it seems that indifference is the opposite of love. My grandmother, of course, she was right. Making a fuss of them keeps love alive, remembering the idiosyncrasies that make each person unique and special. Knowing what kind of apple, which condiment, which kind of chips, whether they like arm tickles or strong massages, whether they like to be left alone when they're feeling sick or they like to be pampered like a child, whether they want to talk things through immediately or they prefer space and time before articulating their feelings. And it is important that we do not run their preferences through our lens. Love is not being the same person. It is both individuation and respect and careful attendance to the differences. This week, can you make a fuss over someone you love? Think hard of what would make them feel fussed over. Ask yourself where you have become indifferent rather than attentive. Then make some love with those around you. Be creative and discerning. Attend to the details in their way. And the biggest gift of this is the love you will feel for the person you are giving to. Remember that ahava, the Hebrew word for love, has hav at its root, which translates to give. Because we love who we give to. Happy giving.
Thanks for listening to Rise and Shine. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to Momentum Podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Join Adrienne again next time for more timeless wisdom and uplifting meditations that fill your heart, feed your soul, and start your day on a positive note.
This podcast was made possible by the generous support of Bonnie Vozar of Chicago, Illinois. Spread the wisdom. Inspire Jewish individuals around the globe by supporting Momentum's podcasts. To sponsor, contact podcast@momentumunlimited.org. You're listening to a Momentum podcast. For unlimited inspiration, wisdom, and empowerment, visit momentumunlimited.org.